Well, welcome. Thank you for joining. First thing I want to make sure everyone can do is say Alentejo. It's one of the most mispronounced regions I've ever known of it anywhere in the world. But it's one of the most beautiful places to visit in Portugal. So this is a very large part of Portugal. It's about a third of the country. And it's all this area kind of below the Tejo River. After the revolution in Portugal in 1974, it had really swung way to the left. And a lot of communist cells took over in Alentejo. After the families who owned these estates got them back from the appropriation of their land, people started making wines again in the 80s. So it was a time when there were people working with very old vines that had been there for 120 years at the time. And it was a really exciting time to be there because the wine was dirt cheap. Nobody knew about it. I could literally buy a bottle of decent wine in a restaurant in Évora for €1. This first wine is from Herdade de Espriu, and it is a wine that is a blend of various grapes. Both these two wines will be blends, but this wine is from an area that basically gets its freshness from its soil as well as the irrigation from the lake. So this is from 16 to 25-year-old vines. So the Espriu wine is Antauvage, Arinto, and Roupero, which are three local grapes. It's in granite and schist underground and then clay loam above. And the second wine is Arinto, Fernão Pires, Syria, and Bical, again, four local grapes, 2,300 feet of altitude. So these are both from basically natural preserves, one in the south and one in the north. The Adega de Porto Alegre is from vineyards all through this natural park, this huge natural park in the mountains.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk about them, because a lot of times there's a perception that Alentejo is only reds, and white wines can shine so well. There's a big thing in the region about pork. A little bit of that fat in the content of acidity, mainly with the second wine, I think cuts through, like something with a pork dish, cut through all that fat.
In the 90s, a lot of people started bringing in things like Cabernet and Syrah, and they found that for two very different reasons, Cabernet and Syrah became important varieties in the Alentejo. Borba is sort of central Alentejo. So this is Trincadeira and Alicante Bouschet in schist soils. Trincadeira is the kind of interesting, difficult child in Alentejo. It's really hard to get perfectly ripe. It can be incredibly beautiful. Julio Bastos is an interesting character. He has a vineyard surrounding this palace right outside of Estremoz. And his family, Isabel Bastos, and the Reynolds family, John Reynolds, they married and they lived in this very beautiful palace. And they grew Alicante Bouschet around this palace. And that was called the Quinta de Carmo at the time. I think it's really interesting to taste wines grown in marble. You don't see them in a lot of places. You see some of them in Tuscany. But this is an area that has a lot of marble. Syrah, Petit Verdot, and Touriga Nacional, grown in clay limestone soils, the limestone being marble. So the fifth wine, Sabroso, this is a wine called Arche. So this is Cabernet Sauvignon, Alicante Bouschet, Syrah, and Touriga Nacional. And it's in clay loam soils.
They're all very different from one another. And typically when you have a lineup of wines that you're tasting, you don't expect for everything to taste so different. And the fact that they all were exhibiting different characteristics threw my palate off in a good way, so I could actually feel like I was identifying things. On the Borba, I was getting like more the deep fruit, like some inkiness, a lot of plums, like good fruit, like blackberries, blueberries, but also the acid and the tannin balance were really good. And then when I tasted the second, the Bastos, I was getting like gasoline, forest floor, but also I felt the alcohol in that one. Immediately, I was like, oh, this is, so when you said 14.5 for all of them, I thought that was also another interesting point because they're all exhibiting.
You perceive the alcohol differently. Yeah.
Right, on each and every one of them. And then I was getting like this leather and this burnt tire. And then you said marble, and I was like, okay, interesting, because I've never had marble. I mean, you know, as a terroir. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, that's something new too, which is great. And then the Sobroso, that was just like all floral and iron and blood, and like then I got some musk and like some olive tapenade. It was a really nice flight. It just totally threw me off from what I thought the progression was going to be.
Vidigueira is a really interesting place because it's super hot, and yet because of the soils are cool. The soils maintain acidity in the grapes. So you get real freshness in that wine, even though it's in a super hot place.
They're all very lovely,
Right.
but all very different.
They are. The Herdade de Rocim is from schist soils in Vidigueira, very poor soils. It's stone lagar with foot treading, and it's 12 months in French oak barrels, and then 6 months in bottle. The Relvas wine from the Relvas family next, the Herdade de São Miguel Reserva. That's Touriga Nacional, Alicante Boucher, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Trincadeira. It's clay and schist soils. This has two days of cold maceration, open lagars with auto mechanical treading, and then goes into oak barrels from malolactic, 400 liter oak for 12 months, and then another 6 months in 5,000 liter oak Foudre. Wine number 8, I think, is a very interesting wine. This is a wine from Porto Alegre, from a vineyard that the Symington family bought, their first venture outside of the Douro. And they called this vineyard Fonsoto, Quinta de Fonsoto, so this is Quinta rather than Herdade. 100% Alicante Boucher, and it is 80% of the lot aged in 400 liter second use French oak barrels. So they are the only people that were doing a post-fermentation maceration. This is a wine that I spent a long time trying to get access to. I was very jealous of people who had old bottles of this wine in their cellars when I was a kid. I was really trying to figure out, how the hell do I get Mouchao? They have the most antique winery you'll see anywhere in Portugal, really. It's all these old vats, and the vats are macacaúba. It's a Brazilian oak or Brazilian wood. It's mahogany, some are mahogany, or parts of it are mahogany, and some are Portuguese oak. And it's in these wooden vats for 3 years, and then another 2 in bottle before release. So it's mainly Alicante Boucher with a little Trincadeira. This is one of the first places where Alicante Boucher was planted. If you get any wine from the 80s, from Mouchao or Carmo, it's going to be the very, very old vine Alicante Boucher. And they're gorgeous. They're absolutely gorgeous.
Throughout the lineup, I get the texture. I think these are like Alicante Boucher is a very texture wine. There is a lot of velvet note. It's not really edgy, but it's kind of like grainy. But the ripeness definitely there throughout. So definitely you can taste that it is a warmer region. I am not getting crazy amount of alcohol overall, but
I don't find the alcohol stands out.
Yeah,
I think that the wine fills out the alcohol completely.
In the Rocim, I'm getting a lot of like the verticality on the wine. So it's not as broad, but it's very linear. So it's not as powerful fruit, but then you get a lot of earthiness, a little bit of that, like a New York, like concrete kind of like smell to it. I actually like this wine a lot. I think this is overall pretty polished, I think.
So this is the one that's a blend.
Yeah. So this one is, there's aromatic. It's not as big, as far as for the texture. On the Symington, I'm not getting much on the palate. I feel like maybe the wine is shut down, I think.
That's why I say, I think you can perceive this wine in the finish right now, but you can't find it in the middle at all.
Yeah.
And with a day of air, it completely expands.
Okay.
And then there's the Mouchao. This has, to me, the most distinctive aroma of all of them.
Although it is the oldest, this is a big wine. You get a lot of like mouth drying tannin at the finish. It's very mouth puckering. The Mouchao, the texture is there, but I think it's going to need another 5 years to kind of like mellow,
to show itself.
mellow out.
I know
what did you like about the Fonsoto one?
I thought that the silky, velvety structure of the wine, the plush blackberry characteristic, you had mentioned that it was also coming from old vines, and I thought that it was very interesting how they did a post-fermentation maceration with the grape skins. Lovely, velvety structure, also the floral characteristics. I got a little violet note in there as well. was quite lovely to me, and I haven't had a lot of these wines.
Thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate your joining. And I thought it was really interesting tasting, so I'm happy.